Hello there, and welcome to Find Your Voice. This is the show where we interview our thought leaders and experts from everything from spirituality, wellness to AI, and all sorts of other fascinating subjects. And today we've got Allura Halliwell as our wonderful guest, and she is a pioneering thought leader in consciousness and core wound healing, who's developed a revolutionary modality called the consciousness method. Allura, how are you doing today? Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Joe. I'm excited to be here and dive into all these exciting, juicy topics about spirituality and consciousness. So let's see where we go.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, it says you describe yourself as having a spontaneous out-of-body experience that changed everything for you. So take us back to that moment and how it redefined your sense of self.
Yeah, that was a monumental turning point in my life. I was pretty much living a very ordinary life, mom of three kids, living in a relationship that wasn't particularly inspiring or fulfilling, in fact, quite stressful. And I was just surviving day to day, to be honest. And then a friend invited me to a meditation retreat, and I thought, wow, this could be a really great opportunity for a little holiday. But I didn't expect what happened to me there in any level. And I think what happened was probably the beginning of the next part of my life. So turning up to that retreat, I began to feel some energy beginning to move in my body. We were invited to go down to the beach for a meditation one morning. And as I stepped onto the sand, I could feel something was not quite right. And I took a few more steps, and then all of a sudden I felt my body being pulled to the sand, and basically my consciousness moving from my toes all the way up through my body to the top of my head. And it actually left the top of my head. So my body was lying, resting on the sand, just breathing, but like kind of not conscious, to be honest. And my consciousness left, like a near-death experience, really. I went out, could see my body lying on the ground. I was like, where am I going? And then I merged with really white, bright light. And as I merged with that light, I lost track of my body, and I merged through that light into what I now call the void, which is just the infinite, endless black space, which is filled with everything, the all, really. When I merged, my consciousness merged with that, it merged with everything. And I was grateful to have a slight degree of awareness, to be conscious, to see my consciousness merging, but I actually blacked out for a while there when I fully merged with that field of consciousness. And I was out there for a long time, an hour and a half on human time. And eventually I felt my body begin to maybe call, and I dropped through frequencies that were just profound. So I dropped through bliss, I dropped through ecstasy, my consciousness dropped through all the high level intense frequencies till I got to the frequency of unconditional love. And then I dropped back out of the void into the brightest light and back down. I could see my body on the beach, and I moved back into my body. And that's the moment I realized that this whole human experience is at a foundational level based on unconditional love. But it was going to take me a while to really embody that and understand that, because when I landed back in my body, it felt like I was this enormous being that had been stuffed into the body of an ant. And I felt that grand kind of infinite feeling trying to process being back in a human body. And that was when I began to feel, wow, this is a really fascinating place to be. And it felt like I was landing for the first time. And I began to feel that everything was energy, everything was frequency. So I wasn't looking at the world from my same viewpoint. And when I opened my eyes, I realized I didn't really know who I was. So it was like my whole system had been completely wiped, and I'd had a complete reboot, but it was like being reborn. So I didn't have my preferences. I didn't understand the relationships I had around me. I didn't have any of my history coming through. So it was like a rebirth, really. And what was most phenomenal about it was that I began to witness that instead of just living my human experience, it was like I had the capacity to have a degree of separation to begin to understand my human experience. So the human part of me started to kind of respond to being human. So my nervous system switched on, and I began to see how much threat and dysfunction was in my body, and my emotional system that had stored decades of emotion began to release that emotion, and my energetic system began to activate. So I began to release a lot of energy through what others might call a Kundalini awakening, where you have a lot of energy moving through your body. So I was in a massive state of complete restructure. Everything about me, all the levels of me was restructuring. And in that time, I was beginning to understand what it was to be human, because it struck me that we kind of get born into this reality, but we don't truly understand how the reality functions around us. And we kind of walk through our existence questioning, why do we feel the way we feel, and what are we trying to create in the external reality to try and make ourselves feel better internally. So that was when I began to understand that there's three really core patterns that all of humanity is energetically committing to, which are the patterns of feeling unloved, unworthy, and unknown, which is where we put all our energy outside of ourselves to try to create these coherent experiences where we finally feel validated, we finally feel loved, we finally feel enough, we finally feel understood, we finally feel complete. And we're trying to manage that outside of us, but at the same time feeling deeply disconnected from that part of us internally. So that was the beginning of that awareness that it's time. I was like, there's something we need here to understand the functioning of reality to get us to a new level of humanity.
Incredible. Wow, that sounds like a certain amazing beach experience. I mean, happened after that? What happened? So as in like an hour or two when you walked back to the people that you were with, I mean, what was the next kind of stage for you for that?
Well, I looked in the mirror and I just realized I didn't know who I was. And I sat down to breakfast and I started to eat something that was in front of me. It was actually a sausage. And my friends just went, "What are you doing? You haven't eaten meat your whole life." And I was like, "I'm not supposed to eat this." And then I realized I didn't have any remembrance of my past preferences. I didn't really know who I was. I felt like a ghost. I felt completely consumed by my inner experience, which was so radical. And I really didn't have any words or capacity to express what I'd been through. So I was walking in this space of really a great deal of disconnection from my physical experience, but so vastly connected to the universe, to energy, to the source consciousness. But it was a really radical mismatch in the beginning. It took me a couple of years to integrate the whole thing, to come back fully into my body. Yeah.
Wow. So, and then from there, you went to start teaching other people about all of this stuff, and you've built what you call the consciousness method. So, how does that kind of differ from traditional healing and sort of coaching modalities?
Well, what I began to understand was that when I was in that reorientation phase, I was looking outside of me for modalities that would help explain what I'd been through. And the more I looked, the more I realized nothing was giving me the answers to really allow me to integrate the new level of truth and awakening and awareness that I was having internally. So that's when I began to study myself and reality and other people on a very high level, to not so much understand how to heal internally, but to understand how, as humans, we interface and create our external reality, and how our reality feeds back to create our internal experience. So the consciousness method is about the consciousness that we as humans embody, and how that interfaces between our internal world and our external world, and how we can use that as a vehicle for true awakening and deep levels of healing, and a real shift of real timelines and consciousness, that we can become very sovereign, free, connected, and very much at peace with the fact that we're here for an evolutionary journey. Yeah, so that was the beginning of that, and it was a lot of internal research, external research, years of testing this and finding the pathway through. And now I work with so many people that have had radical shifts in their lives because they've been doing the interpersonal work, the psychology, the breath work, the inner work, and then they've been trying to find a spiritual pathway. But the consciousness method blends the internal psychodynamic work and the spiritual work into one path, whereby you can actually experience a true change.
That's really interesting. And why do you think so many people kind of like feel stuck with like doing all the right things in therapy, like self-help or in spiritual practices?
Yeah, it's really fascinating because there's nothing essentially wrong with any of those pathways, but I think they lack an aspect that makes it comprehensive, that means that you can actually understand the interface between you as a human and the reality, as I said before, because most of them look at how you are internally, but they don't really help you to transverse why things are happening to you. So people end up still feeling very much a victim to their reality, and they live in this victim and separation consciousness where they're still feeling very trapped. Even though they have very high levels of understanding of who they are, they feel innately trapped in this consciousness that they can't really, I suppose, win in reality. They don't really know how to move forward. So a lot of the practices I do are about rewriting that relationship with reality and really stretching beyond the confines of how we feel we have to show up to survive, to actually create a new level of reality and a new level of relationship with reality that creates basically anything you can imagine. It's like the relationships you love, the health you want, the sense of validation and purpose with your work. It's wide spectrum. There's nothing that the consciousness can't shift when you understand the keys to getting there. Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, you talk about the interface between our internal world and external reality. So why is that space so important, and how can we work with it consciously?
Yeah, so you're going to have a very set template whereby you're going to show up in your reality in a way that's very predetermined. It's determined by our energy. So our energy has very set patterns of how we interact with the people around us, the experiences around us. So we need to firstly work with your energetic template, which for most people, when it's unconscious, the majority of our energy is going outside of our body and trying to survive our external experience. And what we want to do is we want to work with moving that energetic experience from externally surviving to internally thriving. So we're reclaiming all our energy to work on the deeper energetic patterns. From there, we're actually looking to go through deep internal portals where we store our unconscious levels of pain and fear. Because the unconscious levels of pain and fear are what is driving some of the major mechanisms of reality for all of us. And they're not even really on the top surface. They're things that we're not really aware of until you get a mirror held up to you so you can really explore those deeper levels that are unconscious. And when you feel into the pain and the deep levels of fear, we're actually not looking to go to the higher levels of the higher frequencies. We're looking to reconnect to the whole of our being through the parts of us that feel separate to us. So there's a process of going through those layers of pain and fear to liberate our whole internal space that creates just by default a different level of reality. And that's just 2 of them, but there's 12 different practices that we go through in the mentorship or in the consciousness modality, because we have to go through step by step to reorientate to receive the next level of experience that we're here for, the next timeline. And a lot of it's also working with your quantum capacity, because we're all vastly powerful beings that are just needing to reclaim a lot of that internal power and understanding so it can be projected out of us on a new level. Because presently, a lot of the projection that we're doing is coming from an unconscious, wounded, separated place. And we want to project a reality around us from a very coherent, expanded, powerful place. Yeah.
Right. Well, you talk about, I mean, that's interesting actually about the wounds, and because obviously you help parents as well, and some of the hidden generational wounds that go unrecognized with how they relate to their children. So tell us a bit more about how you help parents with connecting with their kids.
Yeah, those deep wounds of feeling unloved, unworthy, and unknown are going to run through the whole of your experience. So your work, your kids, your family life. And these are the deep patterns that we've almost by osmosis sucked in, and the deep going. Those deep patterns that we've brought in and we've kind of by osmosis began to respond to from our childhood. So we learn from our parents how to respond to the world, and then we imprint this on our own kids. The problem is the kids that you have, or the family dynamic is going to trigger you. It's going to create a whole lot of access to your pain and fear. And if you're not conscious that those triggers are actually for your evolutionary well-being, and they're going to evolve you once you begin to explore them, they can just end up being the place where you fall back into coercion, domination, and control of your kids to try and get them to not push those wounds within you. So excavating and understanding your own wounding means that you do not have to be reactive and triggered in your responses to your kids. And that means you can create a consciousness of connection and a really deep level of expansion in your family life, because everything that happens in the family life is just there to really evolve everybody. The fractalization or the repetition of the patterns can be stopped by doing this work, because we no longer react to it in the same unconscious patterns. That means the kids don't have to keep acting out in that way to try to get that pattern healed, because they're trying to serve our evolution. Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I also read somewhere as well, you talk about emotional sovereignty. So what does that actually mean?
Yeah, emotional sovereignty, energetic sovereignty, all of those sovereign experiences are so important because what we're doing is we're reclaiming our capacity to be affected externally by people and experiences around us. So it's almost like we're cutting the puppet strings, that we no longer need to feel like the situation or the relationship can hurt us on a deeper level, because we've found a way to self-process that anything that's external is simply a mirror to the internal pattern that we need to work with. So when we're emotionally sovereign, anything that happens outside of us, we simply take that and then we work through that internally with the processes that release our emotional, I suppose, tension or gripping to the reactivity in that relationship, and then we free ourselves. So no relationship needs to hold you in a place of feeling like you're a victim to it or that you can't resolve it, because when you resolve it internally, the relationship shifts organically. It's an amazing thing to see. And the people I work with, they're reconciling relationships with parents, with children, with friendships, with ex-partners, with the whole gamut, because they've taken the responsibility to process their emotions internally, and that person can no longer trigger or have power over them. And it's just an incredibly impactful thing to go through. And the emotional liberation then means you're more free and you're not going to be coerced or dominated or controlled, which are the three main mechanisms that hook into the wounding and cause you to not feel sovereign in your life. Yeah.
Right. Okay. That's really interesting. So the relationship rewire framework is that's part of it, I'm guessing as well. So what patterns do most people have in their sort of romantic lives, and how can they start shifting them?
Yeah, it's so easy to blame your partner for being really difficult or challenging or making things hard for you. And this is about actually taking full spectrum ownership that anything in your life is going to show you the relationship to yourself. So instead of the external relationship being primary, we work with the internal relationship being primary first, and then the relationship externally coming from that. And when you shift the focus back to you, it's almost like the relationship gets space to show itself as the truth it is. The patterns reveal what's actually there. And when you stop engaging and energizing those patterns because you're processing them internally, it's almost like there's a breath of fresh air that comes in. You don't need to keep being trying to make something different happen with your partner, right? Or trying to survive the relationship on some level. So the relationship to self becomes primary. Then we see everything as a reflection, and that creates just a whole new level of freedom and connectivity. But you also have free will. You also begin to see, is this relationship really serving and aligning to me? And that is just a whole nother level where people can begin to realize when they're in relationships that are actually not serving their soul, but they're in it from their wounding to try to make themselves feel better, to be loved, to validate themselves, to avoid the wound of feeling alone or isolated or unsafe or whatever it is. And when you kind of take care of that yourself, you can see actually that relationship is an incredible evolutionary vehicle for me to come home to myself and then consciously either choose the relationship or move from it. So you're no longer in a codependence of needing that relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. So I think a lot of our audience as well would be interested, especially on our LinkedIn kind of profiles about corporate wellness, because there's a lot of corporate wellness that often fail from what we understand to kind of create real change. And how does consciousness and your consciousness program sort of work to help professionals lead a more, authentic life?
Yeah, I work with a lot of people in very high profile positions that have felt that their essence or their energetics are very much tied up in the corporation. So that means they don't really feel completely themselves or free in the experience within their workplace. And that means then they're getting that unworthy wound of actually not feeling quite enough in whatever they do, pushed a lot by the corporation or their boss or the organization or the targets or whatever it is. So they're then wanting to work more and work harder and give more of themselves to try to create a difference and try and get some relief from that discomfort they may be feeling, but it just cycles and they end up feeling quite disconnected. And I see a lot of secondary health issues and feeling disconnected emotionally and mentally because it's just a massive drain and, leading towards burnout. So it's about working with that space to find where you need to increase your own level of wholeness, I suppose, and connectivity. So you don't need to keep leaning in to try and survive the company, but then increasing your levels of communication, of inner boundaries, of awareness of how you want to run your, part of the business, instead of falling into compliance and creating something that's not really in alignment. So when you work with that has flow-on effects for everything, and going to work just feels a more liberated experience, and not that you're at the mercy of something that's not really in alignment.
That's very useful. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that are very interested in learning more about that, definitely. So your upcoming book is titled Unloved, Unworthy and Unknown. Can you share what inspired that title and what readers can expect to gain from it?
Yeah, well, everyone has one of those wounds to one degree or another. The title kind of came from that sense that they're not just wounds, they're actually sort of energetic pathways to discovering a whole nother understanding of how we live and how we can function. And so I'm trying to get people to relook at those inner spaces in a way that's maybe got a fresh lens and an understanding of what we're here to do in terms of our evolution, our soul evolution, our personal evolution. And that book is almost a download of the consciousness from the moment I woke up on that beach to all the humans that I've helped to reorientate their lives and how we've stepped through that process. So I'm hoping that it's going to be a beautiful resource for people that are really interested in doing this big level of work.
That's great. And where can they find out about the book, Allura? Where do they can they order it?
It's going to be up on my Allura Halliwell page very soon. We're at the final stage of the editing, and I've got the Consciousness Method podcast live on the major platforms. That actually goes through the people that have already started to do this work, and they share their life-changing stories, so you can get a feel of the impact that is possible. And then the book should be hopefully ready by September. At the very latest. I'm giving myself a bit of a runway. I'm hoping July, August.
Awesome. Good stuff. Okay, well, and when it comes to sort of like these conversations and being on podcasts and stuff, how do you think that being on podcasts is kind of reshaping the way that, people build trust and also helping people open up about their inner thoughts and feelings and becoming more vulnerable? What are your kind of thoughts on that side of things?
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful opportunity to spread different I suppose angles on getting to the same place of healing, of working, of living. So I just think there's such a gift in being able to share this knowledge and to have these conversations. And I just think for everyone that has, that listens, I think it's just a really great way to expand your awareness of what's possible. So it's a beautiful, beautiful gift. And it's just a taste, right, of what is out there. So I really would encourage, if anyone feels that they're drawn to something, if it's this or something else, to go deeper and to let that just be a springboard for more research and for more integration for yourself, right? Not just take someone's word for it, but really go and try and see if that applies to your life and it's going to add a lot of value for you. Yeah,
that's fantastic, Allura. That's wonderful. And my take on it as well is obviously there's a lot of big things happening within AI at the moment. So I think the power of the human voice and I think the value of these human experiences is becoming even more valuable. I think there's going to be a lot more people that are going to appreciate and take a lot of help from listening to real conversations on these sorts of experiences. So thank you for sharing all of that with us today. Much appreciate it.
My pleasure, Joe. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries at all. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And Allura, you've been a wonderful guest, and thank you for your time. And look forward to hearing you on more future podcasts.
Thanks, Joe.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.